I got it. We are recording.
There we go. Okay, awesome. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Deborah Adman, your friendly neighborhood moderator for these member forums. These have been fun to do for me, and I'm glad to see so many of you still coming back for more. And if this is your first time, welcome. Today, we're going to go over a few ground rules, and then Paul's going to talk about the learning objective. We've got a lot of territory to cover. There's been a lot of changes, and we haven't met for a few weeks. So this will be a good update for everyone. Use your mute button to prevent transmitting background noise. I have dogs that bark all the time. I can't really mute myself very well, but I do have dogs and the door is closed. If you do have a question during the discussion, please submit that via the chat feature. That helps me kind of track it and get to it and make sure that you get your question answered. And if you do have a point that you'd like to share, same thing. Use the chat feature so you can be recognized, and just remember you have to unmute yourself when it's your turn to talk. Also, forum is being recorded, and we provide the recording and a recap, written recap, later in the day. So with all of those ground rules, I'm going to hand it off to Paul. Paul's going to tell you what we're going to try to do and achieve this morning.
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everybody, and thank you once again for spending time with us and dedicating some time. We have not had a member forum as far as the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in a few weeks now, and from what I'm understanding just in some chat, that we've got a lot of new information today, so I'm going to keep my segment a bit short, but wanted to remind everybody that this forum now is scheduled for, I believe it's monthly communications. If it feels, or if with whatever new protocols or new standards come out change, we can always, upon request or upon need, get another one of these scheduled. Great participation today. Like Deb had said, keep yourself muted if you can. We do want to make sure that these are value adds for everybody in participation. So please get into that chat box, ask your questions, because more than likely, if it's something that you have a gray area about, you're probably not the only one. So please, let's get your questions answered. And having said that, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on me. We've got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to pass it over to Marilyn Stansbury, the ECRM CEO, and she's going to talk to us about our SMEs today and go over the outline.
Awesome. Well, today we have Pete Aden and Kristin White, who we have both heard from before as PPP and PPE, and all kinds of other impacts regarding labor and employment have occurred during COVID. Today, I want everybody to have your "How am I really" hat on, and please do share your comments, ask a question, share with us how things are going. It will help us inform how regularly we should be doing these forums. They have been very popular. I get questions before, I get questions after, and I've had some really great comments back from our members. So as long as this is valuable and relevant, we will continue to do them. And if that's weekly, we'll do them weekly. We just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the needs that you have on the COVID side of things while you're trying to run your businesses out there in the wild right now. So Pete's going to go first and give us updates. It is tax day, so Pete gets extra kudos today for even being up and available to be with us. He's probably already been up since about 12:01 a.m. working on taxes, and we'll be doing so until 11:59 p.m. Anyway, even though it got put off to the last minute, it got put off till July 15th. I know there's probably still lots of last minute happening, and COVID probably didn't help any at all in inquiries. Kristin White's going to talk to us about a whole variety of things. And David Jones, our industry partner from QED, is going to join us at 8 o'clock. And he has some updates on some new products and equipment And not necessarily because they're QED products. I don't mean it that way. I mean, he's starting to see industry impacts. So we're going to be doing an industry impact presentation. And anybody that's on the call that's seeing other things that contractors are using that are PPE or that are mitigation strategies for the COVID virus, we want to be able to begin to insert those things so that our contractors know the variety of things that are available to them, because we are definitely in this for the long haul. Deb, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you and just say thank you to everyone who's on the call.
Thanks, Marilyn. Okay, we have a lot to discuss, and it's so appropriate that it is tax day, and Pete is going to go first because we know that his inbox is going to blow up at any second. So, Pete, let's start with what new developments are you seeing? Anything particular jumping out in the flood of people trying to hit the tax deadline today? Anything you want to tee up first?
Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. As everybody's mentioned, it is tax day. So that is, I guess, good news, bad news, scary news. All depends on how you take it. It has been eye-opening to see that some people are just natural procrastinators, and didn't matter that they got an extra 3 months. They still got their stuff in the last couple of days and then thought, oh, well, surely you'll get it done in that amount of time. So nothing new there, just the timing of it is different. So with that being said, though, I think most people are in pretty good shape. The really hard part is today is also the day that first and second quarter estimates are due for 2020. And that has become very tough to know what the right answer is. As you can imagine, people are still wondering about what the true taxability of the PPP loan is going to be. You'll remember way back when, well, one of these first forums we did, everybody said, well, the PPP loan is not taxable, and so therefore it shouldn't have a big impact. And then the IRS later came out and said, yes, that is true, but the expenses that you use to pay with that PPP loan are not deductible. And therefore, in a roundabout way, made it taxable again. So there's still a few senators fighting and writing the IRS and saying, hey, let's go ahead and make this thing truly non-taxable. That information has not come out. I think that will have a big impact on what happens with people's quarterly estimate payments, and just the true uncertainty of how this year 2020 is going to pan out. Our job's going to keep going. Are we going to burn through all of our backlogs? Just so many questions that we really don't have answers on. I think most people are taking kind of I'll say cautiously optimistic approach and saying, hey, I want to pay in a little bit with my estimates, but I'm not going to pay in too much because I don't want to be wishing I had that money back in my own bank account to keep my business going. So a lot of question marks, a lot of head scratching that's going on around that piece.
Well, and Pete, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say what's further confusing all of that are the abundance of social media posting going on around the taxation issue. And I'm starting to hear advertising. I heard it on the radio yesterday from like 2 or 3 different firms who are saying, you're going to have to pay taxes on your stimulus money as well, which, so call us so we can help you figure it all out. Now that stimulus money is different from the PPP, correct? That would be like the $1,200 or $2,400 that you received. And so what's the down low on that? Do we know?
I haven't heard anything on that, Deb, partially because I've been avoiding social media probably, but, I think, is there a possibility that they're going to ask for some of that money back? Yeah, I do, if you don't meet certain ramifications. But again, I think at this point it's too early to really say. That it's really frustrating to be given something and then later on have somebody change the rules on you. And that is exactly what's going on with the PPP loans. You know, it's a really unique time where in the history of dealing with the government, at least in my opinion, if you had a deal, you had a deal, and they stuck to that regardless of how it was written. And this has been so vague because they've come to market, I guess, so fast with it that the rules are continuing to change. Another example of that is with the PPP loan, where they went from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. And people were really concerned, am I going to have to do my full-time equivalents out, you know, at the end of 24 weeks? And that was the rule for, I don't know, a week. And then all of a sudden they came back and said, no, you can pick a time frame in between 8 and 24. So, you know, I think my gut says they're really trying to allow most of this money to be forgivable. That's their true intent. And they're trying to figure out ways to make that happen. But then they also want to be able to put the hammer down on people who abuse the system. So it's a really tough position that they're in, and I kind of understand that. But it's also equally, if not more difficult, being the employer and trying to figure out what's best for your business. So
yeah.
I guess that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Yeah, I interrupted you as you were going to go on to another thought, or did you just cover that?
I did.
Okay, awesome. It's very confusing. I know, even just dealing with my bank and my mortgage, and I got a forbearance for 90 days. They're just now real sticklers about when that gets paid back, and so and they didn't disclose a whole lot of that up front because they didn't know. So as Marilyn always likes to say, we're building the wings while we're flying the plane, and I think that that's just the new normal for us. So yeah, thanks, Pete.
I guess I got one more thing, Deb, is that, you know, the banks are now starting to have a lot of webinars that they're starting to put out on regards to forgiveness for the loan. So definitely pay attention to those, and if you need help, there's people out there who can definitely help you, but I think the banks will try to do a real good job of helping with that. I would caution, I think, you know, when we were going to get the loans, it was really important to be kind of first in line. On this one, I don't know that you want to be first in line, although you want to have all your documentation ready and to go. But as these rules keep evolving, I think waiting a little bit is not a bad thing. I feel like some people have a lot of angst and just want to get it done and off their plate, and I don't know that that's the right move.
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting. My bank has said they're going to put up a special portal that you can go to in order to work through what is and is not forgivable. We do have a question from Tim. Is the 8 weeks, Pete, still an option on the PPP?
It is. It is. So that is still out there. It may not be the best option, so you really need to work through, and there's a whole lot of math that goes into it. But yeah, that's one of the options, that you can still use the 8 weeks, or you can do something different.
Okay. But we're beyond the 8 weeks, correct? Or it's from the point in time you got your PPP. Okay.
Yeah, it's from when you got your PPP, so it depends on, everybody's timing is going to be a little bit different.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Okay, Kristin, ready to go, Superwoman?
I know, and I didn't bring my Wonder Woman cup today.
You know, there have been a lot of modifications and executive orders, spikes causing havoc, the debate everywhere, and legislative policies are now, you know, fluctuating or being signed into law and are going to have an impact. So can you update us on extended orders, amended orders? I know there are a few ones that I'm very aware of, like the mandatory mask orders in the Tri-County area, which is Douglas County, Arapahoe County, and my county, Adams County. But I know that there's also an awful lot that the governor's office just put out yesterday. So I'm going to just say, take it away and help us understand.
Okay, great. I'm going to move this over here so I can look at my screen too. From the public health order side, I mean, those requirements are still pretty similar for businesses. I mean, we're in the protect your neighbors, you know, as Polis calls it, which is the third phase. But when you look at, I mean, most of the changes were what affects our personal life. If you look at the issues for business, it's still the symptom check of your employees, either doing that or having them report in, 6 foot distancing, avoiding gatherings of more than 10 people, you know, reporting to public health department if you've got 2 or more that you're, you know, sending home. So, you know, from the day-to-day side and wearing masks, you know, and you've got the mandatory mask that Tri-County came out with that you just mentioned. So it's one of those where we're not, from a business side, I think what you've been doing, you're going to keep doing for the month, at least for the month of July. We're not, you know, seeing a whole lot of change there. I mean, the office requirement is still at the 50% capacity. So that's really, you know, I was surprised that those requirements didn't change. I mean, maybe now that we see what's happening in other states, we shouldn't be surprised. But, you know, when this order came out, I thought we would have seen a little bit of change on that, but we haven't. So that we're still, you know, doing what we've been doing. The big change that we saw that Deb mentioned for the Governor Polis signed yesterday is the Colorado paid sick leave bill. And so that's something I want to walk through because it's pretty complicated. I had it up here and it went away. If you haven't read through it, we sent out an alert on it trying to hit the high points, but I'd encourage you to actually go and read the bill because there's a lot in this legislation and what you've got to do. So I want to hit the points of it because the first that goes into effect immediately is that if you haven't been subject to the federal paid sick leave, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act that we've talked about on here, that is now applicable to all employers in Colorado through the end of the year. So if you remember, the way the federal legislation was written was that it only applied to employers that had less than 500 employees. And then there was a small business exemption for those with less than 50. It's clear that those over 500 are now subject to this act within Colorado. What's not clear to us is if the small business exemption still applies, because the only language they put in the legislation is regardless of size, this applies to you. And so that makes sense that for big employers it does now, but for small employers, the small business exemption wasn't just size, because you also had to certify that providing the leave was going to have a negative impact on your finances. So if you've been operating under the view that you are exempt because you are too small, I would say, and like I said, this is a recommendation, we don't know yet, I would say keep that small business exemption for now. Let's see if we get any guidance from our state labor department on that. But document why. The financial issues to me is going to become even more important because of the way this reads. So something to keep in mind, if you've not been applying Families First, that is now applicable to you. And I wasn't going to go through all those requirements because we've talked about them a lot, but remember, Families First has 2 sets of sick leave. So it's got paid sick leave, and then it has the emergency FMLA leave, which is the reduction in pay. So you're dealing with that. Then the second piece of this is that we now have mandatory, we've never had this in our state as far as I know, we now have required paid sick leave starting January 1, 2021 for any employers with 16 or more employees. Now starting January 1, 2022, it's all employers. So regardless of size. So, you know, even if you are below that 15 threshold, you go to reprieve next year, might as well start getting ready because it's going to hit you in 2022. And some of the big differences that, well, let me talk about the requirements, then we'll see kind of the differences of what we see in most policies. So under this law, it requires that employees start accruing 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours that they work immediately upon hiring, up to a maximum of 48 hours. And they can take the paid sick leave as soon as they accrue it. And they can also carry forward in subsequent years any paid sick leave that they don't use. So these are requirements where you're going to have to go back and look at your sick leave policies, because a lot of policies have 60 or 90-day periods before people start accruing leave. That has to go away, at least for this amount. Employees have to start accruing it as soon as they work. This also applies to part-time employees. A lot of employers only cover full-time with like PTO policies. This is now part-time. So those will be the big things to look at. If your policy is already more generous, so let's say that you let everyone start accruing leave from day one, and they accrue more than 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, you don't have to change your policy. So you can have a more generous policy, but you just got to make sure that you meet these requirements. One of the inconsistencies here, which as a lawyer is very frustrating, is that in our state, when we call something wages under our wage order, that means it has to be paid out at termination. They call sick leave wages, but then they specifically say it does not need to be paid out at termination. So just trying to confuse us all a little bit more, but just so
Yeah,
you know,
really.
but it specifically says you do not have to pay it out at termination. If you rehire an employee within 6 months of termination, any unused paid sick days must be reinstituted. And paid sick days do carry over to a successor employer. So something to keep in mind if you're buying a business, you're going to buy that.
Wait, can you explain that a little bit more? Paid sick leave, sick days go to a new employer?
It'd be a successor in interest. So that's a legal term. There's certain requirements that you'd have to meet, but a lot of times you can show your business as a successor in interest if you buy another business and you hire all the same employees, you keep the business intact. Essentially, I move in as a new owner, if you will. I can be deemed a successor employer. If that happens, you're also buying the sick leave that the employees have.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that, like I said, successor in interest has its own factors, so you'd want to look at that to make sure, depending on how you're buying a business, of what that looks like. It's got a whole list of things people can use sick leave for. Pretty typical. I mean, as far as what you let people take PTO for, I would not, my recommendation would be, make it pretty broad. One of the issues. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Kristin, Marianne has a question regarding sick leave. How long do you have to carry over the sick leave if someone doesn't take it in a year? Do they now, have double the hours as of year 2, like instead of 48, they have 96?
Good question. So yeah, because it just talks about that there's got to be the carryover into subsequent years. So essentially, the way we'd recommend writing your policy is you're going to put a cap on accrual, right? So if you let people accrue up to 80 hours, for example, that's it. They can never, even though they can carry over year to year, you could never accrue more than 80 hours until you take some of that time. And that's the way we've been writing PTO policies for a while. Because, we had the decisions last year and the information that came out saying that PTO should be paid out at termination, like vacation pay. So we've been writing policies. So yeah, so that your accrual caps are going to become really important, because the way this reads is they get to carry it forward. So but you only have to be offering on this law a maximum of 48 hours. So I think that accrual cap will be really important. Something else to look at with your policy. This one I thought was kind of interesting. You may require documentation from the employee to use their paid sick leave if they take 4 or more consecutive paid sick days. So that's to me, I don't know that they talked to a lot of employers when they asked that you can now take 2 days off, use your paid sick leave, and not need any documentation. Now it's up to 4 days before that documentation requirement kicks in. So something else to look at in your policy. The next part, so that's one kind of paid sick leave provision. The next set of paid sick leave that you need to build into your policy is you've now got to provide additional sick leave if there is a public health emergency. So this is going to be a separate policy you're going to want to have, that in the event of a public health emergency, this is additional paid sick leave available to your employees. And this one's a big number. For full-time employees, this is 80 hours of additional paid sick leave. For those who work less than 40 hours a week, you're supposed to provide the greater of the number of hours the employee is scheduled to work in a 14-day period, or the average time that he works in a 14-day period. So it's not just part-time, but you're going to have to actually look at, you know, how many hours does that employee actually work in a 2-week period? Because, you know, is he working 30? Yeah, go ahead.
So we, you know, we are in the midst of that kind of situation. The law was just signed. So when does this take effect?
So this part, yeah, good question. So the requirement to now apply families first, the federal law, is effective immediately. The other provisions are January 1, 2021.
Okay.
So you have, let me see here. And for this one, there's no documentation requirement for the employee to take leave for self-isolation due to a positive diagnosis, if they're seeking medical treatment, or they're caring for a family member or child. So similar to the language in Families First as to why employees would take that leave under the federal legislation, it's not exactly mirrored, but pretty close to similar reasons. Interesting, you know, there's no documentation requirement, and that's could be a little problematic here. And there's also no tax break, right? I mean, under the federal law, if you provide that leave, you get some tax relief. So, you know, this one, I mean, hopefully we don't find ourselves in another pandemic next year, but this is something you're going to want to build into your policy. There are, you know, it's pretty typical anti-retaliation provisions. There's notification and posting requirements. We're supposed to see regulations coming out from the Colorado Department of Labor, you know, giving us some more guidance on these requirements. So, you know, I would expect that to come out sometime this year. So look for that. And like I said, right now we're, you know, just interpreting the bare bones law. We can at least pull out the requirements here, but we should get more information as far as these requirements. One issue is under this law as well, I want to mention is you've got to retain documents, documenting the number, or retain records, documenting the number of hours the employee worked, the paid sick leave accrued, and how much they used. So, you know, we've seen some very large employers go to unlimited sick leave. I think a lot of times this is more in the tech field than construction, but they don't track it because it's unlimited. And so now everyone's going to need to track your paid sick leave because you're going to have to document, and you've got to produce those records to the State Department of Labor, Division of Labor, upon request. So another, you know, record keeping requirement. So pretty specific law. I think what I saw yesterday is we're now at one of 12 states that have such requirements, but you know, this one's yeah, pretty progressive with what all it's requiring, especially the 48 hours.
Yeah. Folks, we will put the link to the bill in the recap notes for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can easily get in there and read it for yourself. Anything else on sick leave, Kristin? Is that pretty much? I mean,
No,
that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. The big question coming up has to do with potentially returning kids to classroom settings.
Mm-hmm.
While their parents are at work, or to help their parents go back to work. And then the other side of that question is, what if employers want parents to work from home again for the first few weeks while the children are in school, to ensure there are no immediate outbreaks that could bring exposure of a parent into the workplace? You know, we all know that children, resilient as they are little germ factories, and they, you know, it's not uncommon to be a parent and come down with a cold because your child brings that home with him or her. What is fair, what's not fair about, you know, parents to work from home for the first few weeks? Can that be mandated, or can they actually go into the workplace if the classroom is open and the kids are back in? It's a confusing thing because nobody knows.
It is. I mean, and I've got school-age kids, so we were just talking about this again last night because we're in DPS and they keep changing what they're doing. Maybe that's every school district. Couple things on it. If the schools are closed, so I mean, meaning it's online learning, then a parent could qualify for leave under the Families First. So as I talked about that federal legislation that is now in effect in Colorado for all employers, it may have been in effect for you already. If school is online learning only, the DOL has said that means school is closed. So they look at, is the physical location closed? So a parent could take what's the EFMLA, the emergency FMLA, which is the 12 weeks at the, I believe it's the 2/3 pay. So that's something to keep in mind as an employer, that, you know, you may have parents asking for that leave that didn't use it in March and April when our kids were home, if they go back online. But if they open up physically, you know, I was thinking about this yesterday of, if the schools open physically, could you say parents need to stay home for a couple, or work from home for a couple weeks? You know, it's not a protected class. So I was trying to think about, you know, what would be the argument from a discriminatory standpoint to ask parents to do that. You know, potentially age, if they're over 40, you know, some parents, I mean, that's, you know, potentially, you know, are you making an age distinction here? We're trying to think of, is there kind of a reverse sex discrimination? I'd be, you know, cautious if all my men are coming in, but I'm having my women stay home. I mean, it's one of those that I can't, you know, there's not an exact law that says you can't do it. Like I said, being a parent isn't a protected class, like being a woman or a minority. But I would be cautious about that. You know, I think it becomes more of a morale, cultural issue if you try to have parents stay home and everyone else has to come in for those 2 weeks. I'm not loving that policy, I guess. But I talked to a couple others in my office, and we kept going, well, it's probably not illegal, but I'm not sure that I would recommend it, if you will.
I think the other question is, what if you don't have children and are asked to come into the office for work, but don't want to?
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I don't know. Can you still work effectively from home? I suppose so. We've all been doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We hope.
Yeah, it really just comes down to, can they work from home? I mean, it goes back to that work refusal. You know, we're still dealing with the work refusal cases, and we're going through the accommodation, and it really becomes an accommodation analysis, and that's really where we're ending up is FMLA available to people, you know, that they need to take off, because we're hearing, look, I need to take care of my elderly grandparent, or I live with my grandparent, or I live with my mother. I don't want to come in because I'm going to expose them. You know, then we're looking at, okay, is there a qualifier under FMLA, or can we make an accommodation? You know, and sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. You know, one of the things I was going to mention too that we've seen, you know, probably towards the end of June, I actually was probably only getting one COVID question a week. About a week ago, that upticked again, and now we're seeing another, you know, we're getting 1 or 2 a day again. And I think it's on exposure. So that's something, if you haven't had a case in your workplace, be prepared, because we're seeing with things opening back up and people going out in the public more, we're getting a lot more exposure cases again. And so we're really walking employers through, okay, what do you do if you get that positive case in your workplace? Because it seems to be happening again, like, you know, feels like back where we were in March and April.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with more testing, we find more cases.
Right.
And yet I heard a statistic yesterday that even with the greater amount of testing that we're doing, we're still only finding about 10% overall. This is sort of in the aggregate of the case people who are positive with COVID. So it means there's a lot more people out there that may or may not have it, or who are asymptomatic. And how do you live your life under those circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
Run your business under those circumstances?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, you know, the contract tracing, you know, kind of that 6-15-48, you know, if everyone's heard of that analysis, I think is really helpful for employers. If you don't have that and aren't using it, you know, definitely read about that, you know, within 6 feet, more than 15 minutes prior, you know, with the 48 hours prior to symptoms. I mean, I think that's given us at least some concrete steps for employers to take when they find out they have a positive employee. People no longer feel like, what do I do? You've got this analysis, you know, here's what we walk through to determine who may need to be sent home.
Okay, so that's 61548. That's something we can get a link to. Is that
yes,
a resource that's available?
Yeah, let me make a note. I know we've done an alert on it, and so I'll send you that because you know, it came from the CDC and their guidance that they put out for it.
Okay. And what if not wanting to work in the office is driven by personal fear? You know, not caring about others, but just being worried for yourself, wanting to work, just not in the office. I mean, that kind of goes back to even somebody who doesn't have kids and doesn't want to come in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really then we walk through that work refusal analysis to determine, you know, why don't they want to come in, right? Is it just fear? They're not actually vulnerable or have a health condition. And then we look at accommodation. You know, can we accommodate this request to work from home? You know, some employers are able to do that more than, I mean, depending on here with construction, depending on their job, you may be able to accommodate that. But it's something that if you're going to accommodate it, you want to let your employees know this isn't a permanent accommodation.
Okay.
You know, we're seeing now with a lot of office workers that people say, oh, I kind of like not commuting downtown and wasting an hour every day there and back, and I can do my job from home. And so you need to let people know if you are accommodating it, the work from home, you know, this isn't a permanent accommodation, especially if it's not based on a medical issue.
Okay, Jason, you have a comment. Do you want to unmute and tell us more?
Yeah, I was just gonna, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
We can see you too.
Yeah, well, I figured I'd turn it on the video. No, we have some accommodations where people, especially with young children, you know, just because you can work from home doesn't mean you can work when you have kids, or at least work effectively. So we've had people still on FMLA with small children while working from home. So, and I don't think that we get to determine as the employer whether or not we agree that they can't work. Like if you're a parent at home with kids and you don't have school, you can claim FMLA, and I don't think we can deny it and say, well, no, you can work from home, you need to keep working, you can't take FMLA. I don't believe we could do that. I think we have to provide it. Does that sound right to you? I just was thinking, just asking people to work from home when they have kids is not necessarily a great solution. If they're asking for FMLA, we have to give it to them.
No, you're right. I mean, if they meet one of the qualifiers for FMLA and you're an employer that's required to provide it, then yeah, you would give that to them. That's part of that. You know, when I say accommodation analysis, that's one of the steps is, you know, because a lot of employers, if you're under 50, you don't have to provide FMLA. So that may, you know, that's where that comes in as far as, yeah, do they meet one of the qualifiers? Do we have, you know, are we an employer required to provide it? If so, then they could take their FMLA leave.
Yep. And isn't taking care of somebody one of those qualifiers too?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if somebody is a high risk, like if you have a grandparent
Right.
at home and they're at high risk, that's a qualifier for FMLA too, right?
Yeah, you could use that. And that's where we've seen a lot of employers go to. If you want to stay home to take care of grandparent or parent, take your FMLA leave. The hard part becomes employers that are under 50 employees that don't provide FMLA leave. Then it becomes just accommodation, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Yeah.
Got it. So that's where you were saying is if you're a small employer less than 50, you may still be able to deny FMLA, even though they're saying it meets everybody, but there's other exemptions for small businesses where they might not have to do that if they can prove a hardship, essentially.
Well, two different things. So one is regular FMLA, like you were talking about, qualifier that, you know, we've always had. for businesses over 50 employees. And now the Families First is an emergency FMLA leave, which is limited solely to childcare. So if you, so two separate things. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Jason, you also made the comment that more testing is not the reason for more cases. I'm not sure I agree with that, but tell me what your thought is.
Well, I think this is just, as this thing is unfolded, there's lots of different kinds of information. And if you read statistics, the percentage of positive cases versus tests is still incredibly high in the United States. And I think that that's sort of a partisan talking point to say, no, just the increase in positive cases isn't really a resurgence or a surgence of the virus. It's just because we're doing more testing. And I think that's a dangerous presumption, personally. And I think you need to look at the percentage of positive versus negative tests that are happening. And, the surging cases in Arizona, Texas, Florida, that's real. That's not just because testing's happening. So I caution us to use partisan talking points and to stick to, what the guidelines that are coming from the government are, and the reality that if there is an increase in cases, to acknowledge that reality. That's all.
Oh,
I don't want to get into politics.
Yeah, no, I think it's a reality too. But I also think that the more you test, the more you're going to discover, and you have to look at all of it in the aggregate. So, but good point. Marilyn, you have a question here about FMLA for 12 weeks, but then COVID is still an impact. What happens after that? Do you want to amplify that a little bit?
Oh yeah, I just, as Jason and Kristin were talking about FMLA, one of the things I thought is, so if you grant the FMLA and you get through the 12 weeks, but COVID is still, an issue, or there's a new spike, what happens after the 12 weeks with that, between that employee and employer?
Well, that's a good question, because especially if you're taking it, once you take FMLA, you've taken it, right? So you're only 12 weeks within that, calendar year. So, once you take the leave, it's gone. Same with, the paid sick leave under the federal law. Once you take it, you've taken it. And we've seen that where, people have used it, and then maybe they've used it to take care of a child who was home from school, and then they get sick a month later, but they've already exhausted it, right? So, we've seen, for the most part, most employers are working with employees, and trying to, leave them at home, even if it becomes unpaid leave. And that's really where we've seen a lot of employers go, is instead of a layoff or a termination, it just becomes unpaid leave. You always have that option to grant unpaid leave, but but it doesn't. For the employee, it's then unpaid. That's tough.
One more question just popped up a little earlier, and I wanted to get to when we were talking about kids going back into the classroom in person. The question is, what advice can you give about adult learning students going back into the classroom in person, which affects ECRM significantly?
Yeah. And I guess maybe what's the question? I guess maybe I'm not understanding the question surrounding.
Well, what advice can you give about adult learning students coming back to in-person classes?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably,
Well, I can jump in on this one. And thank you, Deborah, for asking that question. We hear about universities and different adult education, such as community college, things like that, going to, for the most part, just everything is online. I have yet really, I know there is like Emily Griffith, for example, is taking some steps to admit students back into the classroom setting. And I guess really my question is there's two different rules out there where, so you don't want to have a gathering more than 10, but then you can occupy a space at 50% capacity. But what if that 50% is over 10 people? Is it for, you have to maintain social distancing in that room? And it gets a little kind of gray area for me, and when it comes to the adult side, because when we were talking about the children and what the big push is to get the children back to school, which I've been in favor for, but they said, the ability to spread is a little bit more minimal than it is for adults. And as adults, right, students ranging anywhere from 18 to 60 years old, we do have online settings, where students can take online classes. We've done that successfully. But what advice would you give about, for like an August start date when students returning to their classes, about having an in-class session? Sorry, it was a long question, Kristin.
No. I mean, I was just thinking, I don't know that I have, good answer here, because this is a hard one. I mean, like I'm with Marilyn and Deb. I'm glad I'm not the governor trying to figure this out, or even head of a school district, because we do have the capacity limits, and typically it's the lesser of, Paul, when you're looking at, if you see conflicting things like that, the way they've written a lot of these orders is the lesser of, as far as capacity limits. So 50% is 5 people. And the 10 is people gathering together. So think like in my office, we've limited it to 20 people that can be in the office, but you couldn't have any more than 10 gathering together in that in a particular space in that office. So for classrooms, I don't know if they're going to try to follow this order or if they're going to come up with their own guidelines of what they do with the social distancing and the masking. That's what we've been hearing is going to go into effect with adult learning classes, is be masking, social distancing, and limiting the class size, and how many you can have in a classroom. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's kind of the best information we've got right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at, is getting that information. We've talked about it in length in our office, and just really kind of want to see what the legal perspective is on it, and like I said, we have the ability to go to an online session, but so should I open classroom now? You know what I mean? It's not that the students are not going to get the education in the classes that they need, but as we're discovering, the stay at home or education at home is way different than the in-class setting, and with electrical contractors, these students are working during the day out there in the field, right? And they're coming in or have a responsibility to have one night a week, right, for school. And so, thank you. I know
Paul, you have the issue. And Paul, you have the issue of there's a requirement to have lab experience as well, which you cannot do online.
No, we do not actually have a requirement for lab. The way the regulatory agency puts it is that we're responsible for their education hours, not their on-the-job training hours. But within the course of our curriculum and subject matter and objectives, there are needed hands-on labs to understand those concepts. And like I said, we have a means and a way of being able to be strategic on how we deliver those strategies and different objectives. But the worry is, it's not that we don't have options. I'm just trying to pick the option, and I guess I'm going to side on the side of caution when it comes to bringing students back into school. And so,
so what should contractors tell their apprentices who are going to or want to plan to be attending classes this fall? Will IEC contact them by a certain date, or do you have a plan for that yet? That's another question we've got.
Yeah, we do. Like I said, we've had some discussions in our office, so we do have plans, and we've got strategies. It's just, like I said, there's just such kind of a gray area on what you can do in the in-person setting. So I don't want to kill too much of this session time on this question, because it's
okay.
We've already talked about, but I was just seeing if there was anything immediate you might want to know. And it sounds to me like it's a question that I think a lot of universities and career colleges and are asking themselves right now as well. So
yeah, so I think at some point communication is what people are asking for, about that. So thank you, Paul, for that. Thank you, Kristin. David Jones has joined us now. And Leland, do you have any signage you want to throw up before he takes over?
Still at the printer. I haven't received it yet.
You know, and no T-shirt that you want to turn around and show us or
They're in
anything
progress.
that says QED. David Jones, welcome.
Thank you.
One of the things I've been reading about is that the electrical distribution channel has lost a lot of traction because of COVID-19. What is of most concern about the duration of the virus and how you do your sales forecasting, among other things?
I think it's like anything else. It's communication, and you find that some contractors are doing okay, some are remaining stable, and some are looking for more work. So I really think it's communication. So who's doing what? How can you help out? Be a team player, be a partner, not being a salesman. You know, being somebody that's going to be a valued asset. So I think they start with that. Yeah,
and then you have to talk to them about supply chain disruption and how that's impacting
right about that. Yeah.
Things.
So there's, oddly enough, on the American-made side, there's been a pretty big push on that. So a lot of American-made products are long lead items, and then with the re-upping of the virus, you know, I'm concerned whether or not Mexico plants are going to shut back down again. That was a disruption for the first time around. They reopened, but they're getting hit pretty good down there. So are they going to close again? That's something to keep an eye on.
Yes, but you know, I think you go back to communication again as these things become factors impacting ability to do business. It's get ahead of it by just simply telling your customers, this is what we're facing, and I think that's your entire point. Let's work together, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of jobs where you would go after value engineered products, and you're trying to save money to the end user. Now it's value added engineering because that's what you can get. So, depending on the lead time, hey, if you have 8 weeks, fine, let's just stay with what you got. But if you want to open faster than that, you're going to have to consider alternatives.
In terms of then, business changes, workflow management, contractor needs and expectations, let's talk about a little bit about the kind of requests you're getting, say in lighting, looking at other things like temperature checking stations within your own business areas, product availability, et cetera. Is there anything that's really challenging you right now other than, just ability for suppliers to deliver?
No, I don't think so. Again, it's back to, what they're specifying, and if they're open to, other alternate ideas, then that's not a big issue. Some of the gear guys are struggling in shipping. I know Siemens has had issues. Squarty has got issues now, and then there was a plant with GE that was underwater, so that was an issue. But to me, a tale that I found that was really kind of leading a concern, and it was actually almost before the virus really took into effect, and that was the number of contractors bidding the same job. So when you're seeing an increase of a job a year ago that might have, a GC was trying to get 3 guys to bid it, there's probably 13 guys bidding it now. So it's more of a struggle, I think, for the contractor than it is for the distributor.
Yeah, I mean, those kinds of cattle calls is what I used to call them, or beauty pageants, are those are tough. Mm-hmm. 13, that's a lot.
It is. Well, and I've seen more than that. It almost looks, we joke on our side that if you look at it, it's going to, and it's not a funny joke, but you look at it and what contractor is going to mess up to get that job?
Wow. Wow.
Other than
Well,
let Leland quote it for you, and then you know you'll get the job.
That would be the
Yeah,
estimator's
right.
fault. That would not be our fault. That would be the estimator.
Well,
why I
let's
have
talk
you do it,
to
yeah.
a few, hear from a few contractors. Leland, how are we doing really?
I think we're really doing, I think we're a little better than we were early on, but we're operating off of, you know, how we have been for a while. Sorry, it's going to be a little loud. There's an ambulance driving by. We're doing what we can. We're doing what we can to keep busy. And like David said, I think there are some projects that we're seeing kind of going on hold or, you know, not kicking off like they were planned to do. But right now we're able to keep everyone busy on each of the sites and projects that we have, some falling off, some just starting. But it's a new thing. So my role is pretty much changed to making sure that safety's first, tracking, contact tracing everybody, just making sure that everybody has what they need to be safe and do the jobs that we have out there. And then also complying with regulations in place from the legal side of it, making sure that we give everything benefit wise that we can to our employees to make sure that they're, if they do get infected, that they're, you know, have enough time to recover. Yeah, that's kind of our operating right now. There's no new normal. It's just what we're facing right now, and we're taking
It's fluctuating daily. Are you seeing any of the huge competitive scenarios that David just described, where there's 13 or more contractors bidding on a job?
As I alluded to earlier, that would be probably the estimator's fault. But yeah, no, any of our bids out there, I know that we are placing some bids on there. I haven't really heard too much feedback about a lot of like a larger pool of bidders, but I'm sure it's definitely happening. I'll check with our chief estimator and see if they're seeing anything with that. But as of right now, I mean, I would say that the bid board that we have, usually we have a whiteboard with a list of all the active bids out to for approval or denial. Used to be probably like, you know, 10, 13 or so, and now it's probably more like 4 or 5. So I think it's more the availability of projects to bid on right now.
So David, when you see that number of competitors for a project, what do you think is motivating that GC? Is it price? Is it quality? You know, I mean, that's you've got to really go through a lot of hoops to, one, be a competitor, but you've also got a lot of time that you have to spend to screen everybody, review proposals, meet with each contractor. I mean, what's driving that, you know, expansion in competitors?
It's a great question. I'd like to know the answer to that one myself. Why they choose to put it out to as many GCs is one, and then as many, you do the multiplication, the number of GCs bidding the jobs times. Say they put it out to 3 to 5, and if, you know, I mean, just so it's
Yeah.
That's really not I mean, it's hard for me to answer that. I would say that it's probably a question better asked to a contractor, as well as why they, you know, is the relationship really, is it incumbent on them to give that contract to the GC a number just to maintain that relationship, even though you don't want the job at the time, or maybe you do, but I think it's more of a question for the EC than it is the distributor. We're taking what we're faced with.
Okay, thanks. Let's go back for a minute to UV lighting and temperature check solutions. What innovative things are you seeing happen? And if John at Milwaukee or DJ at ABB have anything to add, I'd love to hear from you both as well. Starting with you, David, in terms of UV lighting and the temp check solution.
You know, oddly enough, I don't know that we're seeing as much of it as I thought we would. I think there's a lot of the stuff that unless a contractor wants to go out there and pursue those opportunities, I mean, that's a huge ask on their part to spend the time to go do that. But I think you're seeing a lot of the end users just go online looking for, the product itself and buying it. Like most of the stuff that you could get out there that might be a plug and play system where they can just plug it in and not have to go to a contractor. The bigger systems, yeah, I mean, they're out there, and we're seeing more and more manufacturers that are starting to play in that field. So it's you're seeing it, but it's not as overwhelming as you think it is. That it should be.
Okay, John, do you want to add anything?
And Deborah, the question wasn't relating to temperature check equipment, or what was the question?
Well, it was, are you seeing any innovative things happening with UV lighting or temperature check stations, other product availability? Just, again, something that very specific, but any thoughts or comments?
I guess the first thing to address in regards to the temperature, because we do make thermal imagers and different temperature, mostly infrared based. Ours are not a medical grade, which means they're not made for the accuracy that you need for the human body. They've got a margin of error of about 5 degrees. And obviously the human body, you go from 98.6 to 101. You can very much get a false negative or positive. So we're very much discouraging anyone from using ours for that purpose, even though we have seen a spike in demand. One thing I've done over the last few months is conducted classes on tool sanitizing and best practices that if people are sharing equipment, we do have official guidelines to sanitize that equipment to help keep that cross-contamination down. Doing things like barricade tape to rope off an area that way people aren't crossing over that line and working too closely together.
Okay, DJ, how about you? Any thoughts, any comments? I know you're here. You might just be on mute. There you go. Now we've got you. DJ?
I think we might have just lost him.
Well, he's still on, but he may have just stepped away. No, I don't even see him anymore.
Yeah, I think after he unmuted. I don't see him.
We lost him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Marilyn, you wanted to hear from a few contractors.
Yeah, I did. Well, and I'm one of the reasons that, John, thank you, and David, thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to hear about it is because coming through to us, we have seen more and more product offerings around UV lighting. And so I'm sort of interested both in use by businesses, what kind of increase or other safety materials we may be seeing used, but then to David, to your point, I also was interested in whether this has meant any new business for our contractors that are doing any of these installations. So that was the reason that I wanted to make sure that we covered that today on the call. But I do invite other contractors that are on to share with us what some of the things are that you've been dealing with. I'll use this opportunity now because we are a little after 8:30. Pinnacle Assurance has offered to provide some additional insight into contact tracing, and also some additional safety protocols that they are seeing in place, and how they are helping contractors and other clients when there have been COVID exposures or concerns about workers' comp claims in this era of COVID. And so they will be on our next member forum, which I think off the top of my head is about the 29th or so of July. Is that correct? July 29th. Okay. July 29th, Pinnacle reached out to me yesterday and said that they had a couple of things that they thought would be very relevant to share on the contact tracing protocols and these workers' comp issues. So, do be prepared to join us for the next call on those topics, particularly relevant for the safety world.
Thanks, Marilyn. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask if any contractors on the call want to weigh in this morning, or if, you know, we're all good.
I wanted to make an update just to everybody that's on the call today that later on this morning at 11 o'clock, we do have our inspectors meeting where we do invite contractors to come in and ask questions to our authorities having jurisdiction, or our inspectors, if you will. And it's a great session. So if you've got questions, and when it comes to code enforcement, how they're conducting, you know, their practices due to the situation that we're in, it's going to be a great meeting, and hope that you can join us. Holly, if you would, if you're in the background, would you just share that link to the chat, and hope to see you there. Just wanted to make an update.
Awesome. Yeah, the monthly NECA inspectors meeting has, NECA IEC inspector meeting has gone online, and it's a great opportunity now for even greater participation. And in addition to tax day, this also happens to be the IEC National Awards Day. So if you haven't submitted a project yet, you still have until 9:59 Mountain Time to get your award submission in for the IEC National Awards. And we will be doing our Summit Awards on August the 13th. So let's move from some of the COVID response and COVID fatigue that folks may be feeling, and get into awards and celebration and recognition mode for the next couple of months.
Marilyn, can I just
would you also talk for a minute
ahead.
about the COVID champion category, which is still
absolutely
open?
Yeah, David, did you have something? And then
yeah, just to follow it, just to finish on that, on the COVID stuff, that in terms of lighting and other pieces of equipment that are available out there, we're seeing very little of it, as much as you would think we would be seeing it. So there are opportunities though out there. Just I didn't want to give the impression that, you know, that it was nothing really going on out there. That's not really true. It's selective though. For example, on the UV stuff for lighting and the equipment, I was looking at some areas where it's very specific as to where you can use it and how you can use it. There are opportunities out there. More and more manufacturers are doing it, and now that we're seeing a big spike again, maybe it'll get more of a second look. So there are things out there, whether it's lighting, whether it's portable lighting, whether it's the one example I was thinking of was in the Russian airport, where they're putting the UV stuff above a false ceiling so that the air is circulating and it's being cleaned that way. So there are different pieces of equipment out there, but it's not as, at least for us, we're not seeing the big rush to those products as you would think.
Just yet. Okay, thanks, David.
Awesome.
Okay, Marilyn, one more thing to plug here.
Yes, and I'm going to turn it into two. So we are in honor of our contractors and partners and others who have really stepped up to the plate in lieu of not having a baseball season. We are going to be awarding COVID champions at the Summit Awards on August 13th. Separate from the Summit Awards, you will be seeing information asking you to share with us what you have done as a company, what you have done as a company for the community or for employees or others. I'm going to call out Leland here because this is something that I know top of mind. he had an employee bring her sewing machine to the office, and while she was taking dispatch calls for the service department, she was making masks for employees. So like pretty cool story and a wonderful example of multitasking. So those are the kinds of stories that we want to hear about what you did to, you know, help out a food bank that was in extra need of supplies early on, or things that you're continuing to do for your team or for the community. We know that those examples are out there, and we really want to take a special moment during this year's awards to call attention to that. So look for those messages in your emails. And we have a special guest on the call today. My brother has called in from Jacksonville because he's in the real estate world, and he has seen, as we talked about a few weeks ago, delays in permitting and plan reviews and inspections and other things. And so he's in Florida. He's not wearing his mask right now, but I'm sure he's in a closed-in office somewhere. But he happens to be in Florida, and we've had a lot of conversations about the spikes that have been occurred in other states, and mitigation strategies and other things. And so he's joined us on the call today to share the wealth, if you will. So thanks for being on, brother. Deb, you had something to mention.
Great, Ed. Great, Ed. I just wanted to mention that for the COVID Champions information, there is a special link that we will make sure you have, that you can then go in and just fill out a little questionnaire that will guide you through the information that we need. So that'll be in the recap notes. And I know Holly is furiously writing all this stuff down, so thank you, Holly, for making sure that that gets in, and I'll make sure that we send it out. So our next member forum will be the 29th, and we'll be getting information out to you all about that. I want to thank David and Kristin and Pete, who's still even with us, John, DJ, everyone, and Ed Akers, welcome, and so happy to see you. We hope we will have a return opportunity to see you again. With that, Marilyn, I don't have anything else. Do you?
I do not. I just wish everybody a wonderful day.
All right, guys. Thank you. We went a little over. Have a great day.
Yeah, be safe, and let IEC Rocky Mountain know if you have any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kristin. Thanks, Pete.
Absolutely.
Recording is now stopped.